Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. The Quranic System of Sustenance. By Allama G. A. Parwez. Translation. Fazal Kareem and Salayina Kareem. Chapter 9. Conflict. The Messenger Muhammad was sent with the Quran in order to establish the system of Islam and to invite the whole world to adopt it. He was born in a society that was based entirely on man-made law, and so there was inequity and corruption everywhere. 41. Under these conditions, the invitation to Islam was nothing short of a call for a major revolution. The messenger's earliest addressees were highly successful merchants of the tribe of Quraysh who worked in all seasons. 106. 1-2. These people had mixed their business with their religion. The Quraysh at the time were the proud custodians of the Kaaba in Mecca, and they commanded much respect in their society. The situation was such that whilst no ordinary person was safe from robbers and bandits in the deserts, the Quraysh could go anywhere without any fear of harassment. The Quraysh merchants were also the chiefs of the land. As it is, political, economic, and religious forces are so powerful that they each have the capacity to strangle humanity. Thus we can imagine how tyrannical, oppressive, and arrogant these forces become when they are combined. This was the state of the Quraysh when the messenger began preaching the lesson of equality, that is, that every human is born equal and is equally worthy of respect. The messenger's revolutionary message. The messenger invited people to join a way of life in which no one has the right to rule another. All human beings would be subject to only one law, one which is not man-made but which is ordained by the Almighty. It would no longer be permissible for anyone to pile up their wealth and thus acquire all the means of production as private property. Because of the principle that these been given freely to humanity by God. Priesthood would be declared a falsehood and thus abolished, since there are no intercessors between the individual and God. The only link between the individual and God would be the Wahi. Revelation. That was sent via the messenger, which would be the universal code of guidance for all. We can imagine how adversely the Quraysh must have reacted to this revolutionary invitation, as they foresaw the consequences that a divine system would have on their present society. At first they didn't take the threat very seriously. Some suggested that the messenger was a madman. Others said he was under a spell. Others still said such ideas were mere idealistic poetry which would be forgotten with time, and thus there was no need to pay any attention to them. It was only when the messenger gained a following and the early implications of the system became apparent that the Quraysh sat up and took notice. Thereafter they began a campaign against the messenger, and this campaign intensified as his movement gained momentum. The campaign reached its zenith at around the time of the Hijrah. The messenger's emigration to Medina, at that time called Yathrib. At the time, all the forces of the land were closing in on him. The Quraysh had wealth, power, influence, and armies at their disposal. They also had full control of the Kaaba and were the chieftains of the land. Against them was a tiny band of people comprised of the poor, who had no influence and no force of power. It had taken the messenger 13 long years to rally just these few in his cause. It seems that only a tiny minority of people from the Quraysh had understood the import of the messenger's invitation and accepted it, whilst the vast majority had become vehemently opposed to it. The messenger's enemies intended to find any means necessary to destroy the movement. And it was in view of this fact that he and his companions left the area and sought a better environment in which to introduce the divine system in practice. This marks the commencement of the Hijrah. There is no doubt that circumstances had become unbearable in Mecca. But even so, having to leave the land of their ancestors, their homes, community, livelihood, and everything that was dear to them, and traveling to a place in which their future was uncertain, was very difficult for them. If they had anything at all in their favor, it was their conviction that the cause for which they had given up everything was based on truth, that it was bound to succeed, and that it was worth the struggle. Of course, even having this kind of conviction required much courage. It was a movement unlike any before in history. It would abandon the ancient traditions that its people had clung to for centuries, and replace them with values that they had never enacted before. They were about to create a new society. They had a conviction in the unseen, that is, they trusted in the long-term implications of Quranic values. Again, this required determination and courage. Such were the circumstances of the early Muslim period. Reassurances. During this period, this small and weak society was in need of much encouragement to keep up its morale. If we look at the brief surahs, chapters, at the end of the Quran, we can see the full picture of the struggle. At one place the Quraysh are told that their military might, wealth and power have intoxicated them and they think they are invincible. But that they should remember the fate of their powerful adversary, the Yemen army of the elephant. They had plotted against the Arabs, but their plans had come to naught and they were totally destroyed. 105. 5. In another verse the new society is told not to fear, but to persevere and establish the divine system of sustenance. 87. 1. The messenger's people were assured of God's support and were promised that their efforts would bring them success. 110. 1. With the establishment of the system, their sustenance and indeed abundance of resources would be guaranteed. 108. 1-3. The Almighty also reassured them that the Quraysh were headed to their doom. The Quran states that whilst the exploitative system of the Quraysh thrived on the blood of the poor, it would soon be burned down along with those who ruled over it. 104. 1-9. And that nothing the Quraysh had amassed in terms of wealth would save them. 111. 1-5. They were about to witness for themselves the consequences of living a life of falsehood. 102. 1-8. They were guilty of restricting the God-given resources. That is, diverting the course of the local rivers, thereby depriving the poor of much-needed water for their crops and general living. 107. 1-7. Elsewhere the Quran emphatically states that there was no need for the new Jamaat to fear for the future, since it was only a natural law that, and, behold, with every hardship comes ease. Indeed, with every hardship comes ease. 94. 5-6. Thus God assured them of a bright future. 93. 4. They were asked to take the workings of nature, in which daylight always follows the night, as a sign. 92. 1-2. How the sun fills the world with its light. 91. 1. And how this light spreads far and wide. 93. 1-2. If the new Muslims feared the enemy, then the best course of action was for them to draw nearer to God and His divine system. They would soon see how God would protect them from evil forces. 113. 1-3, 114. 1-4. Their apprehension was understandable to some extent, since they were about to set up a system that had never been tried among them before, and they were perhaps uncertain that they would receive what was promised to them. In fact, they were told, this was not the first time that the world had witnessed the advent of the divine system. It had been introduced countless times before. The messenger's people were told to look at history and consider what had happened to previous oppressive societies that resembled the Quraysh. All of them without exception had met their end. Likewise they were told to consider the fate of those who had brought the message and established the divine system before. History had recorded its verdict in their favor. Hence the messenger's people were assured of the same success. 103. 1-3. Hence this movement for a divine system was not really new at all. Noah invited his people to the divine system, and similarly Jesus made his invitation through his sermons at the Mount of Olives. The same movement was initiated at the Mount of Sinai under messenger Moses' leadership, and the same legacy was now in the hands of the new Muslims under the leadership of Messenger Muhammad. God reminded them that whenever and wherever in the past the invitation to the truth had been made, those in power had opposed it and said, richer than you are we in wealth and in children, and so we are not going to be made to suffer. 34. 35. God asked them to look at the ruins and other archaeological evidence left behind by former civilizations, and to consider what had happened to them all in the end. Compared with the Quraysh, these civilizations were mightier, with larger populations and greater abundance of resources. 30. 9-10. As an example, some of these nations went to the extent of building fortresses in the mountains, believing that these buildings would always offer them protection. 26. 128-9. They lived in areas with plentiful natural resources, such as springs, forests, and the means of cultivation. 26. 147-9. But since they were also creating economic inequities, every aspect of their lives was also unstable. They were creating chaos from falsehood. 53. 52. As a result, the edifice of their respective societies fell down. 26. 158. Those before them did also plot against God's way. But God took their structures from their foundations, and the roof fell down on them from above. And the wrath seized them from directions they did not perceive. 16. 26. The outstanding characteristic of all these societies was their obsession with immediate gains, and their lack of long-term vision. No matter progressive and attractive these societies may have seemed, their time was always limited. They soon vanished from the earth like a field mowed to the ground. 10. 24. And how many populations have we destroyed, which indulged in their life of ease and plenty? Now those habitations of theirs, after them, are deserted, all but a miserable few remain. And indeed we alone are their heirs. 28. 58. See also 28. 78. The fate of past nations. We have already mentioned that the same invitation had come from every messenger including Moses and Jesus. The new Muslims were given the example of numerous nations that had failed to change their ways. These include the people of Noah. 11. 38-44, 23. 33, 26. 120, 54. 9-13. The tribe of Ad to whom the prophet Hud was sent. 26. 139, 41. 16, 46. 26, 89. 6. The people of Sheba who had strayed from the divine system some time after Solomon's death. 34. 16. The nation of Midian whose messenger was Shoaib. 26. 189, 29. 37. And the ancient Egyptians under the tyrannical rule of Pharaoh. 43. 51, 54. 44. And Karun. Korah. 28. 76, 39. 49, 40. 83, 41. 50. To whom Moses was sent. Each of these nations failed to heed the warnings of their respective messengers and thus all were destroyed in accordance with the divine law of Makafat. Requital. 65. 8. They persisted for a while, but the consequences of their false way of life eventually caught up with them. And even with all their wealth and power, they were unable to prevent their destruction. The revolution of God overthrew them. They fell and were unable to stand again. 51. 45. Each of these nations had believed that they possessed great dignity and self-respect, but they were eventually disgraced. 29. 25. Indeed they were lost in history. 29. 40, 53. 54. Eventually all that remained of them were stories and legends. 23. 44. That together served as a warning to others not to make the same mistakes. 51. 37. The new Muslims were encouraged to travel and verify these facts for themselves. 30. 42, 35. 44, 40. 21. If they looked, they would find plenty of evidence of these nations' former glory and subsequent destruction. 22. 45, 46. 25, 53. 54. In light of the examples we have listed above, the members of the new Jamaat were asked, could their opponents, the Quraysh, really expect to escape the grip of God? Was their unjust economic system immune to the law of requital? The Quraysh were indeed deluded if they thought this was the case. Or do they think, they who do evil deeds, that they can escape us? Poor indeed is their judgment. 29. 4. The Quraysh were short-sighted. They failed to see that any system based on miserliness invariably has the same outcome. And they should not think, they who niggardly cling to all that God has granted them out of his bounty, that this is good for them. Nay, it is bad for them. 3. 180. A doomed way of life. These people, states the Quran, stealthily prey upon the earnings of others, and they devise laws designed expressly to legitimize this thievery. 9. 67. But they don't understand that this will inevitably lead to their fall from grace. Indeed, God does not love any of those who, full of self-conceit, act in a boastful manner. Nor those who are niggardly, and bid others to be niggardly, and conceal whatever God has bestowed upon them out of his bounty. And so we have readied shameful suffering for all who thus deny the truth. 4. 36-7. Say. Those who invent a lie against God will never prosper. 10. 69. Do then those who devise evil schemes feel secure that God will not cause the earth to swallow them up, or that the wrath will not seize them from directions they little perceive? 16. 45. No matter how well these societies establish themselves, and no matter how clever their contingency plans to forestall disaster, they cannot persist, as this would contravene divine law. In the words of Briffault, a society in which disregard of right is habitual and accepted, inevitably deteriorates and perishes. However much the individual may temporarily benefit by iniquity, the social organism of which he is a part, and the very class which enjoys the fruits of that iniquity, suffer inevitable deterioration through its operation. They are unadapted to the facts of their environment. The wages of sin is death, by the inevitable operation of natural selection. The Quran warned that all the scheming of the Quraysh could not save them from God's universal law. 8. 59, 24. 57, 29. 22, 34. 5, 34. 38. They couldn't escape it. 29. 4. And they couldn't do anything to obstruct it. 52. 8. The divine revolution had been decreed and nothing could stop it. Those of a selfish mentality do not oppose the divine revolution merely with words. They are so wicked that they actively try to make life difficult for the Jamaat. They insult or mock the believers in an attempt to put off anyone who might otherwise join the Jamaat, and also to compel the existing believers to leave it. The aim is to divert the believers from their objective. At this point it becomes imperative for the members of the Jamaat to protect themselves from these tactics, to evade them, and to keep forging ahead with their own program. Hence the messenger was told, and the hour is surely coming, when this will be manifest. So, O Muhammad, overlook any human faults with gracious forgiveness. 15. 85. See also 15. 3, 43. 89, 52. 45, 54, 6, and 70. 42. God stated in no uncertain terms that the divine revolution must and will come to pass, and that none could prevent it. The Quraysh were making every effort to distract the messenger's people from their mission. Hence the best recourse for the Jamaat at that point was to avoid them, and endure with patience whatever people may say against you, O Muhammad, and avoid them with a comely avoidance. 73. 10. And leave me alone to deal with those who deny the truth, those who enjoy the blessings of life without any thought of God, and bear with them for a little while. 73. 11. See also 68. 44 and 74. 11. And you shall certainly know the truth of it all after a while. 38. 88. Elsewhere the Quran states, then turn away from them, and you shall incur no blame. 51. 54. Endure then, with patience, all that the rejectors may say, always remembering that no one but God gives you the strength to endure adversity, and do not grieve over them, and neither be distressed by the false arguments which they devise. For indeed, God is with those who are conscious of him and do good. 16. 127-8. Again it is stated, and extol his glory at night, and at the time when the stars retreat. That is, keep working through the period of darkness and remain united. 52. 49. And pay no heed to anyone whose heart we have rendered neglectful of all remembrance of us. 18. 28. According to the divine law of requital, there is a brief period of time between an action and its consequence. When we sow a seed, a period of time passes before we see it grow and produce fruit. The period of time between action and consequence is termed the law of respite. The same law comes into effect whenever steps are taken to establish the divine system of sustenance. Law of respite. It is during this period of respite that the members of the Jamaat were instructed by the Almighty not to allow themselves to be caught up in the schemes of their foes, but to remain focused on their goal at every stage. Since the results of their efforts did not immediately become manifest, the believers were constantly reminded not to become disheartened or impatient. The revolution was bound to succeed, but only in due course, and the results would become apparent step by step, almost imperceptibly, just as a plant grows and blossoms before our eyes. This is what the Quran means by a conviction in the unseen, that is the conviction that the system we put into action must bear fruit. Hence the Jamaat are told that they need not waste their energy arguing with those who have no faith in the system. Such people would be dealt with in accordance with the dictates of divine retribution. Hence, leave me alone with those who deny this tiding. We shall bring them low, step by step, without their perceiving how it has come about. 4. Behold, though I may give them rain, respite, for a while, my subtle scheme is exceedingly firm. 68. 44-5. The incredulous Quraysh believed that the idea of giving away one's wealth in order to achieve prosperity both on earth and in the hereafter was utter madness. They were given the reply, and soon you will see, and they who presently mock you will see / which of you was afflicted with madness. 68. 5-6. The believers, Mu'mineen, were assured that they had nothing to fear, since divine retribution was surrounding the enemy on all sides. But all the while God encompasses them, the rejectors, without their being aware of it. 85. 20. The divine law can neither be weakened by the grand schemes and falsehoods that the rejectors might devise, nor can the passage of time diminish this law and make it irrelevant to the age. This is because the divine law is protected and impervious to the effects of time. Nay, this is a glorious Quran, inscribed in a preserved tablet. 85. 21-2. As for those who were proud and arrogant because of their material successes, God told the believers, "Leave me alone to deal with him." 74:11. They believed that they would continue to prosper and become ever richer. Yet is he greedy, that I should add yet more. 74:15. But such people would never have their way. No, indeed he knowingly, stubbornly sets himself against our messages. Soon will I visit him with a mount of calamities. 74:16-7. Whilst the Quraysh failed to take the warning seriously, they were actually headed towards their own destruction. Behold, this is indeed a word that distinguishes between truth and falsehood, and is no idle tale. 86:13-14. The Quraysh were conspiring against the messenger's people, but this had not escaped God's notice. 86:15-16. It was only a matter of time before the consequences of their actions would catch up with them. 86:17. The Quraysh didn't realize that they were being watched. 96:14. God warned that if they did not mend their ways they would bring destruction upon themselves. 96:15-18. He gave them a period of respite. 183:16. 61:35. 45. To give them a chance to change. Of course this was a limited period. And once it passed, nothing would prevent their annihilation. 34:30. The messenger was hence told, "But God did not choose to chastise them when you, O Prophet, were still among them, nor would God chastise them when they might still ask for forgiveness." 8:34. Eventually the messenger left Mecca for Medina, marking the point at which the Quraysh had no hope of redeeming themselves. The tables were turned, and they would soon discover what happens to those who willfully withhold the means of production that are given freely by God. 68:12-16. The wealth they hoarded would offer them no security or protection. 69:28-92. 111. 2. Their destruction was inevitable. 70:17. Their death, figuratively speaking, would surround them on all sides. In fact theirs would be a fate worse than death, for they would live to see their humiliation. 14:17. At this stage they would be abandoned even by friends and loved ones. For on that day you will see all who were lost in sin linked together in fetters, clothed in garments of black pitch, with fire veiling their faces. 14:49-50. Then can they who devise evil schemes ever feel sure that God will not cause the earth to swallow them, or that suffering will not befall them without their knowing where it came from? Or that he will not take them to task suddenly, in the midst of their comings and goings without their being able to elude him. 16:45-6. Wrong impressions. When the messenger's opponents were warned about the period of respite, they mocked him and accused him of fear-mongering. They asked him, "When will our promised destruction come?" 27:71. Of course giving them a response was futile. Instead the messenger asked his people not to allow themselves to be upset by the derisive remarks of the Quraysh. 27:70. God's promise was true, and was bound to be fulfilled. Hence the messenger's people were told to have patience and not weaken their resolve. 30:60. Those who behave arrogantly on the earth without any right, these will I turn away from my messages. For even if they see all the signs, they will not believe in them. And though they may see the way to redeem themselves, they will not adopt it. But if they see the way of error, that is the way they will adopt. For they have rejected our messages, and have remained heedless of them. 7. 146. The Quraysh had created a system that was designed to maintain inequity in society, but this very scheme would lead to their downfall. God's law of requital has always acted to restore balance, without exception. If anyone has any doubts about this, said the Almighty, then they should review history and ask themselves whether a system based on inequity has ever prospered in the long term. Despite the warnings, they continue their arrogant behavior on earth, and their devising of evil. Yet, in the end, such evil scheming will engulf none but its authors. And can they expect anything but to be made to go the way of those sinners of olden times? Thus it is no change / have they never journeyed about the earth and seen what happened in the end to those of a similar mentality, who lived before their time and were so much greater than they in power? God can never be foiled by anything whatever in the heavens or on earth, for he is all-knowing, infinite in his power. 35. 43-4. We have already mentioned that for every action there is a reaction, and that this reaction will come after a certain amount of time has passed. Every tiding from God has a term set for its fulfillment, and in time you will come to know the truth. 6. 67. After this term of respite, the system of falsehood will be severed at its root. 108. 3. Since the new Muslims were founding their society upon truth, God guaranteed them success. It is God who sends forth the winds, so that they raise a cloud, and then he spreads it over the skies as he wills. That is, nature operates as he set it to do so, and causes it to break up so that you see the rain issue from within it. And as soon as he causes it to fall upon whomever he wills of his servants, lo, they rejoice. 30. 48. This guarantee was decreed and put on record. 4. God has so ordained. I shall most certainly prevail, I and my apostles. Indeed, God is powerful, almighty. 58. 21. God decreed that if a false system and a true system could meet the same fate, then this was as good as saying that his law of requital was not in force anywhere in the universe. According to the Quran, the notion that might is right is a falsehood. The outcome of these two ways of life could never be the same. Would we treat those who have attained to faith and do righteous deeds in the same manner as we shall treat those who spread corruption on earth? Would we treat the God-conscious in the same manner as the wicked? 38. 28. See also 45. 21. By refusing to change their ways, the Quraysh were merely awaiting their fate, just like those in history who had fallen before them. Do they then expect anything but what happened in the days of the men who passed away before them? Say, you wait then, for I too will wait with you. 10. 102. See also 18. 55, 32, 30, 43, 89 and 52. 31. The final outcome. In the end, the final messenger left them with the words, O my people, do whatever you can. I will do my part. Soon you will know to whom the future belongs. Certain it is that the evildoers will not prosper. 6. 135. See also 11. 93, 11. 21, 20. 135 and 39. 39. The Quran makes similar statements. But those who are lost in sin will never prosper. 10. 17. Indeed, such rejectors of the truth will never prosper. 23. 118. God does not further the works of spreaders of corruption. 10. 81. Note that God proposed a scientific means by which to verify his deen, way of life, rather than simple debate or philosophical argument through the messenger. The divine system was being put to the test in history's laboratory. They needed only to wait for the result. They were asked to be patient, for the results of their efforts would not become manifest immediately. But in any case they would see the results here on earth. Hence, soon you will know to whom the future belongs. 6. 135. Cutting all ties. The Quraysh were too arrogant and set in their ways to heed the warnings. In fact, they were so filled with hatred that they decided to eliminate the man who was extending the invitation to the divine system, once and for all. It was at this point that the Jamaat was advised to formally dissociate from the Quraysh and to leave, since the two groups had no common ground. The messenger took his people and parted with the words, "To you be your way, deen, and to me mine." 109. 6. The messenger Muhammad was actually following in the footsteps of other messengers in history. Lot said, "I will leave home for the sake of my Lord, Rabb. For he is exalted in might, and wise." 29. 26. Abraham said, "I will go to my Rabb. He will surely guide me." 37. 99. Of course, those with vested interests among the Quraysh could hardly be expected to tolerate the establishment of the divine system anywhere, whether it be in their own backyard or anywhere else. They were well aware that in the long term the effects of this new way of life would be felt far and wide, and so would threaten their very existence. Hence they tried to thwart the movement with the force of the sword. The new Muslims now had to make a decision once and for all. Either they would give up the movement, leaving the fate of humanity in evil hands, or they would fight in the name of freedom, for the good of humanity. God obviously supported their decision to fight. They were prepared, if necessary, to lay down their lives to defend the divine system of sustenance. This was total commitment, and in tune with the Quranic principle that the self can only develop by giving. Broadly speaking, humans have two things they can give: the material possessions that they earn, and their God-given lives. Material possessions usually can be replaced. Life cannot. Thus, if a human being sacrifices his life, his self gains immortality. It follows that the decision of the new Muslims to take to the battlefield was inevitable. Taking up the sword. Let us briefly review those verses in the Quran that mention the taking up of arms, or iron. God does not love those who are miserly with God-given resources, and bid others to be miserly. 57. 24. In other words, as we have mentioned earlier in this chapter, the Quran tells us that those who prey upon others' possessions and find ways to legitimize their thievery will find no favor with God. Through this divine guidance we gave you a balance with which to weigh between right and wrong, and so that men might behave with equity. 57. 25. In other words, God has provided divine guidance through revelation and hence the means to establish the divine system of Rububiyyah for the benefit of humanity. The verse continues, "And we provided the ability to make use of iron, in which there is awesome power as well as benefit for man. And all this was given to you, so that God might mark out those who would stand up for him and his apostle." 57. 25. Here the Quran raises the important point that God provides a sword of iron, which is both a source of power and benefit for humanity. Thus it essentially refers to iron as a means of defense. When selfish elements try to destroy the divine system, or prevent its establishment in the first place, and neither argument nor reason convinces them to desist, and they won't respect the teachings of the revelation, there is no choice but to take up arms against them. Furthermore, when the supporters of the divine system decide to defend it with their lives, This becomes living proof of how much their inner selves have developed, and their total conviction in the as yet unseen results of the system, even though he is beyond the reach of human perception. 57. 25. The Quran places much stress on the sword, power, and when it can justly be used. Here we will not go into further detail on this point. Suffice it to say that in light of the Quran, and to paraphrase Dr. Iqbal, power that is not tempered by deen is deadlier than poison. And power that is in the guardianship of deen is the antidote to all poisons. We have already seen that according to the Quran, the meaning of deen is to provide material sustenance for humanity and also nurture and strengthen the self. Nafs. This system is established in order to reflect the divine attribute of Rabbi el-Alamin, and is the only means by which the self can be perfected. The Quran is the constitution of this system, and the sword is its defense. The Quran is the custodian of the sword in order to ensure that it is never raised unjustly. And the sword protects the Quran against those who would like to see it vitiated and turned into a mere recital. The Quraysh raised its military might against the Jamaat for a number of years, but with time the Quraysh began to fall one by one. And, in the end, the last remnant of those folk who had been bent on evil-doing was wiped out. 6. 45. As a result, the Jamaat looked forward to a brighter future. 39. 69. An aside. Note that in everything we have written over the last few pages, and as we will continue, our only source of reference for the history has been the Quran. We have not referred to either written accounts of history or oral traditions. Nor have we delved beyond any surface details of how the final messenger went about establishing the divine system, and how long it survived after his death. It is not that there is a lack of relevant information to be found in these sources. A detailed study of these sources will of course reveal much of these details. However, the problem is that for every instance of evidence in a book that supports a particular viewpoint, there will be at least one instance in the same book that contradicts it. None of the historical resources are in consensus on even minor details. Subsequently, Muslims cannot agree whether they should pray with their hands over their chests or over their navels, or whether they should utter the word Amen loudly or in a whisper. There is endless debate over the reliability of the historical resources. As an example, there was once a debate on television in Pakistan over the division of crop produce between the cultivator and the landowner. Since in Pakistan the system of feudalism still exists, and landowners take a sizable portion of the crop produce by virtue of the fact that they own the land, those involved in the debate looked to early Muslim historical sources to try and discover how the messenger might have handled the issue. One party argued that it was wrong to divide the crop between the cultivator and the landowner. The other party claimed it was perfectly legitimate. Both sides referred to the hadith, traditions and narrations of the final messenger to corroborate their respective positions, and both claimed that their hadith was more reliable and authentic than that of the other side. And in fact, arguments for and against feudalism continue in Pakistan on and off to this day. This problem arises whenever hadith are discussed, for whatever reason. In deen, however, the highest authority belongs to the Quran, which God has taken upon himself to protect for all time, and in which there is no contradiction. It follows that this is the only truly reliable source we can refer to, and hence I have used only the Quran as my point of reference. Since we accept that the Quran is free of contradiction, and since we have quoted solely from the Quran on these pages, we can safely assume that the historical events occurred as we have described them. And it goes without saying that the messenger's mission in life was to build his society expressly in accordance with the teachings of the Quran. The fact is that the messenger would never say or do anything that went against the final revelation. With this in mind, we can easily test any historical material in light of the Quran. Any material that is in agreement with the spirit of the Quran can be said to be correct or reliable in principle. Otherwise it should be rejected. So reliable historical sources tell us, for example, that the messenger never hoarded any wealth, that he never left any inheritance to his family, that he reportedly said, "Whoever has more horses for riding than he needs, should give the surplus horse to others," and that he encouraged those traveling with surplus supplies to share them with others. The companion of the messenger, Abu Sa'id Khudri, in fact noted that the messenger mentioned many things that ought to be shared. Reflecting upon this, the companion realized that the point of these utterances of the messenger was to stress that the Quranic teaching "keep only what you need" applied not only to money, but to every material possession. But in any case, not all historical evidence is reliable. If we take the traditionalist view, according to which we are expected to accept all that has been handed down to us through the ages without question, and to even use it to interpret the Quran, then we can see that this is wrong, since history is open to dispute whilst the Quran is not. Our history was compiled at the time when Muslim civilization was already slipping away from the Quran's guidance. This was the time during which the caliphate was being turned into a monarchy and those with vested interests were taking back control of every department of human life. Monarchy and capitalism are two sides of the same coin. Obviously, with such leaders now at the helm, we can hardly expect them to provide an objective, let alone accurate, depiction of events during the time of the messenger. Even during this early period, these vested interests couldn't afford to tell the truth, since it would only expose their false setup. How could the emerging tyrannical monarchy allow anyone to see that its system flew in the face of God's teachings and the practice of the messenger? Thus it is quite reasonable to presume that the written history of the messenger we have today is corrupted, especially in light of the fact that it was compiled in a much later period, when the caliph was being hailed as the shadow of God in every sermon at every mosque. Obviously, if the shadow of God is un-Quranic, then it follows that any institutes declared halal, permissible, under this corrupt system, in particular those of the capitalist and other vested interests, are really un-Quranic as well. Therefore it is not surprising that we find few signs of the divine system of sustenance in the pages of history compiled during the period of the monarchical caliphate. We may find a few scattered clues here and there that give us a vague idea at best. Yet some people demand to see historical evidence of the divine system of sustenance in operation during the time of the messenger. They argue that the lack of such evidence itself proves that the Quranic system we have outlined in this book is a falsehood. It goes without saying that this argument is both flawed and misleading. Others may argue that what we have outlined in this book contradicts the traditional beliefs of Muslims that have been handed down through the ages, and according to which private ownership is perfectly legitimate. But with respect, it is common knowledge that the caliphate lasted only a short period and Muslims have been ruled by kings for over 1,000 years. We have tolerated monarchy even though it is acknowledged by all that Islam totally opposes it. Likewise, the fact that capitalism has persisted in Muslim society does not mean that it is acceptable in Islam. Note that neither history nor traditions are the final authorities on matters of deen. The only authority is the Quran, and this is why I have attempted to describe the divine system from a strictly Quranic point of view. It is up to the reader to decide whether or not my findings are in accordance with its teachings. A fundamental objection. Now we come to an issue which, if not adequately addressed, has the potential to raise unsettling questions in the mind. We might ask, if hoarding and private acquisition is forbidden in the divine system, then what becomes of precepts such as sadaqat and zakat in the long term, or the commands to take care of orphans, poor relatives, the weak and vulnerable sections of society, and the poor? Indeed, what of the laws of inheritance? Will these teachings, all of which appear frequently and are given much attention in the Quran, not become obsolete? Does the fact that these teachings are preserved in the Quran not suggest that God does allow private acquisition and hoarding after all? This question is important, and so we must weigh up the facts carefully. First of all, we should bear in mind God's claim that had the Quran not come from him, but from some other source, then it would have contained contradictions. 4. 82. Thus if we take the established practices of any Muslim society or system in toto, and find that they conflict even slightly with the Quran's teachings, then it can be safely said that the society does not reflect the spirit of the Quran. A society can only be said to be Islamic if it is in total harmony with the Quran. The Quran completely forbids the hoarding of wealth. Nowhere do we find a single verse that denotes otherwise. With this in mind, can we justify the claim that we are permitted to hoard as much as we like and then give a small fixed amount as zakat in order to sanctify it? Does this practice really accord with Quranic teachings? Obviously it does not. It contradicts the book that claims to never contradict itself. For an example of how the Quran has been misinterpreted, we should take a look at the narrations that have been fabricated for the purpose. In the Quran there is a verse that states, "But as for all who lay up treasures of gold and silver and do not spend them for the sake of God, give them the tiding of grievous suffering in the life to come." 9:34. The next verse states that the hoarded wealth of such people will be melted in the fires of hell and used to brand them. 9:35. Hence, according to the Quran, those who hoard their wealth are destined for hell. This verse alone is sufficient to show that the traditional understanding of zakat is completely wrong. According to the traditional view, we can hoard as much as we wish, but if we give 2.5% of it annually to charity, then this makes the rest of our wealth halal, permissible. According to one hadith, Ibn Abbas says that when this verse 9:34 was revealed to the messenger, the Muslims were confounded. They became heavy of heart. Umar ibn Khattab said to them, "I will take your troubles away and ease your hardship." Thereupon Umar went to the messenger and beseeched him, "O Messenger of God, this verse has troubled your companions." The messenger replied, "This is why God has made zakat obligatory, so that the rest of your wealth will become purified." And similarly, inheritance laws have been made obligatory to ensure that those you leave behind after death will receive your wealth. Ibn Abbas says that upon hearing the messenger's reply, Umar happily declared, "God is great." It is quite clear from the tone of the above passage that it was invented to protect capitalist interests. The capitalism thriving in today's Muslim world owes its very existence to hadith of this type, in spite of the clear injunctions of the Quran that oppose this position. Yet not only do modern Muslims ignore the Quranic injunctions, but they have also made it obligatory to accept these hadith as true. Moving on, and as we have already mentioned, the Quran likens the establishment of the system of Rabubiyyah to a climb up a steep uphill road. We know that it is inadvisable to run up a steep hill or mountain. A climber must take his time and ascend gradually, and even then he or she will become breathless. We don't know exactly when the concept of private ownership first infected human society, but since that time it seems to have become accepted that the desire to possess is in human nature. In fact, it is also commonly accepted that if the right of ownership is taken away, then this diminishes the incentive to work. From a traditional religious perspective, banning private ownership and hoarding also makes it impossible to practice sadaqat or zakat, almsgiving and charity respectively, as no one will have any surplus to give away, and so the opportunity of doing a good religious deed will be lost. Hence, so say the critics, any system that abolishes private ownership is doomed to fail and is impractical in any case. As such, they are not wholly wrong. If we are told that tomorrow we must voluntarily give up our property and possessions or they will be taken from us, then indeed this is unrealistic. After all, in the selfish systems that we live in, every individual accepts that he and his offspring must have possessions in order to survive. In times of hardship no one will take care of him, and so he must depend upon himself, that is his own savings. When this is the accepted norm, we can understand why the idea of giving up possessions would seem totally unrealistic and impractical. This is why the Quran adopts a gradualist approach to reforming human society to bring it in line with its ideal. On one hand, as we have already shown, it brings about a psychological change in the people. And on the other, it creates an atmosphere in which the individual feels increasingly secure in the knowledge that giving away his possessions will not put him in danger. All Quranic instructions on subjects such as almsgiving and charity, trade, lending, borrowing, inheritance, etc., may be considered part of the first phase. As society begins to change and new circumstances and challenges arise, the laws pertaining to the first phase are obviously no longer applicable, and they effectively recede into the background. The fact is that these laws are conditional, that is, they are concerned with the specific condition of a given society. For example, the punishment for adultery is clearly ordained in the Quran. 24. 2. The underlying principle is to create a culture in which adulterous behavior gradually decreases and then becomes unheard of. Obviously, in such circumstances there will no longer be any need to enforce the Quranic punishment for adultery, since this behavior itself will have become outmoded, although of course the law itself will remain preserved in the Quran, just in case. As another example, the Quran states that anyone who willfully breaks a promise should feed 10 impoverished people, or clothe them, or free a slave. 5. 89. We know that the Quran abolishes the institute of slavery. But since slavery still existed during the time of the final messenger, these instructions were designed to help integrate the existing slaves into society. Once the existing slaves were integrated into society, and the acquisition of replacements was banned, then the institute of slavery was automatically abolished. From that point onward, the Quranic option to free a slave to atone for a broken promise no longer applied. In the same way, if a society becomes so self-sufficient that there is no longer a poor or needy citizen to be found, then the Quranic option to feed an impoverished person no longer applies. At this point it will be left to the administration to decide a suitable penalty for a broken promise. As yet another example, if an administration makes arrangements to provide loans to people, then private lending will obviously become obsolete, and so the Quranic instructions regarding individual loans will no longer be enforced. Similarly, if an individual has nothing to leave in his estate upon death, then the laws regarding inheritance cannot be implemented. From these examples we can see that these Quranic injunctions are conditional. That is, they may or may not be actively enforced depending upon the circumstances of a given time. In any case, however, these injunctions are never abrogated. They are conditionally inoperative. The Quranic injunction allowing the individual to use fine sand for ablution instead of water before prayer may become inoperative in a city where water is easily available. But the injunction is never abrogated, in case it becomes necessary to apply it again in future. Summary. In this chapter we have observed that according to the Quran, 1. In an Islamic society the administration is responsible for ensuring that all the needs of the people are met. And the exact means for doing so is also left up to the society in accordance with its particular circumstances. 2. No one can own anything that is surplus to his needs. The surplus, whether money or produce, must be left open for the benefit of society. Again, how this surplus is collected is left up to the society. 3. In an ideal Islamic system, the meaning of private ownership will become restricted to the things that we use every day, but have neither the desire nor the need to sell. These private possessions may not even remain in the hands of those who inherit them, as their needs will already be met by the system. We can imagine that in such a society, Quranic laws on such matters as charity, trade, and inheritance 194 will no longer be applicable as such, but will forever apply to any Islamic society that is still in its early stage. As society evolves ever closer to the ideal system of Rabubiyyah, the laws pertaining to the early phase will recede further into the background, and so the system will be manifest in its full glory. It will change the world and indeed the heavens. One day the earth will be changed to a different earth, and so will be the heavens, and men will be marshaled forth, before God, the One, the Irresistible. 14:48. The human values of today will be replaced by God's values. When that time comes, human beings will no longer operate on principles for personal gain but will stand only for the law of Rabbubiyah. A day when all mankind will stand before the sustainer of the worlds. 83:6. Here we must address an important point. Looking at history, we find that those individuals who gave their all for the betterment of humanity are revered and remembered throughout the ages. Neither are such individuals motivated by self-interest or personal gain, nor do they leave anything material behind. The history of the messenger tells us that he never accumulated any wealth, and he left nothing behind in his estate. This being the case, then obviously he could not have given zakat, as traditionally understood. Since zakat is only given annually in order to purify accumulated wealth, God made the messenger's life an example for the Ummah. And since we know that this was the way of the messenger, the Ummah should follow his example, which is at any rate in accordance with the teachings of the Quran. Other than the messenger, the defining quality of any Wali Allah, friend of God, is his/her selflessness. Indeed, such individuals have always been celebrated for giving whatever they received to hungry and impoverished people. It is universally accepted that such selflessness is a sign of greatness. However, when it is suggested that Islam teaches this as the norm, critics are quick to raise objections. Remember that Islam offers a way of life in which it becomes possible for every individual to confidently give his surplus away to help meet the needs of others. In other words, it creates a community in which every single individual is a friend of God. This is the reason that the Quran has not mentioned any special group comprising friends of God. Instead, it states that all mu'mineen, people of conviction, are friends of God.